How often did you leave the suburb?
Um, I didn't leave until I was in the 10th or 11th grade in high school because during the summer between the 10th and 11th grade, I went up to Ojai near Santa Barbara for a summer camp. And I made a lot of friends there who lived in West Los Angeles, which was out of the suburbs. It was Los Angeles proper. And I used to visit them a lot after we became friends, so that wasn't until the 11th grade of high school. Up until then, we never left the suburbs.
Do you remember what the perception of the outside was before you had seen it?
Not really. It probably not as quiet and not as um, simple as the suburbs. I think the city was, we saw the city as being noisier and more crowded also, but also, a lot more crime.
And did that become a reality when you visited it more often when you were in high school?
Um, well, when I was in high school, then things like that didn't scare me as much as when I was a small child, and so I actually thrived on it.
Mm-hmm.
And we often went to nightclubs and concerts and restaurants and things like that, which were virtually unheard of in the suburbs.
Um, the fan's going off. Not a fan. Um, what sort of values do you think the neighborhood upheld?
In Reseda or Woodland Hills or both.
Both.
Friendship, the importance of family, uh, honesty, getting along with everybody. I don't remember ever feeling like I was being left out of something or we weren't able to participate in something that all the other kids were able to. I remember the only thing I ever remember about differences at that time was one comment that a friend of mine made when I believe we were in junior high school around the time of my bar mitzvah. One of my friends who wasn't Jewish said, I wish I were Jewish because there's more money in it because you have a bar mitzvah and you get money for presents." But that was a positive difference, but I didn't really think that was a very, I thought that was kind of a silly thing that he said, and I never really felt like we were better than the other kids, but I certainly didn't feel we were worse or disadvantaged. Weapons, guns, soldiers, had a bike, maybe some sports equipment, baseball and bat and football, basketball. Leslie had dolls, dress up clothes, dresses, wigs, artificial like plastic wigs. When we bought our house, it was built on dirt, and there were no other houses in the area aside from the few that were in the area we lived in. And in fact, I can't remember how long this lasted, but for some time she would do her grocery shopping by standing in front of the house and waiting for a bus to come by, and the bus had groceries on it, and she would ride the bus and do her shopping on the bus while the bus driver was driving through the neighborhood and picking up people and dropping off people. I went between the 10th grade and 11th grade,
Mm-hmm.
and I went because my aunt and uncle suggested that I go because I was not doing well in school, and they thought that I had fallen in with a bunch of students who were a bad influence on me, and they thought it'd be helpful to go someplace where there would be more positive and better role models. I attended as a worker. They had, when you got to be 10th grade, 11th grade, then you were either a junior counselor or a member of a group of people who mainly worked, dishwashers, gardeners, maintenance workers, babysitters for the children of some of the senior staff. And we did it was an educational program, so we not only did our jobs, but we also regularly attended prayer services and did art and Jewish history and other kinds of programming, plus we did acting and things like that. It had a very positive effect because I was with kids who were completely different from the kids that I had been spending so much time hanging out with when I was back at school. And it had a very positive influence on me because they had had much higher ambitions than I had, and I wanted to be like them. When I left to go to camp, my goal in life was to go to junior college, community college for 2 years, and then I was going to get a job in a gas station. And that was basically how I saw the rest of my life. And when I got back from that summer, I told my parents that I wanted to go to UCLA. And by the time I was in the 12th grade, the next year, I felt like I wanted to go to law school and be a lawyer possibly. So my goals changed dramatically. My parents were very liberal, so they, in that regard, so they really never had imposed any expectations on me. They never said you have to work harder, or you have to do more than what you're doing, or you should have higher goals. So they never really said anything to me. Most kids at my high school went on to college and 4-year colleges, and they had very high ambitions, I think. So it was unusual, but it wasn't unusual among those students that I spent time with. So I was hanging around with kids who didn't have very high goals as I did, so it didn't seem unusual to me. I know that education is valued highly generally in the Jewish religion. Again, I was there as a worker, but even the workers also were expected to do learning and studying and praying and things like that. And it wasn't just that the kids I was with at camp had significant goals in life, but they also were not impressed by me and the things that I was interested in. They were kind of bored by me because I didn't have anything interesting to say, and so I really had to buckle down and really turn my brain on and start being a more interesting person and being interested in things before anyone was really interested in spending time with me. For some reason, there just wasn't that influence at the synagogue that I got from the kids that I was at camp with. I think there was a youth group, but I didn't really spend any time with the youth group. I know Leslie, my older sister, spent a lot of time with the youth group, and a lot of her friends were friendships she had made through the youth group, but I don't think I really did. And that may have been because I was going to Hebrew school and Sunday school, and I was spending a lot of time at synagogue just in school, and I didn't really like it. I wasn't motivated, I wasn't trying very hard, so I wasn't achieving very much, and as a result, it wasn't very rewarding to me and an enjoyable experience, so I didn't really like spending time at the synagogue. If I'd grown up in the city rather than the suburbs, I probably would have been exposed to a lot more and a lot more diverse opinions and kinds of kids and families. We were all, it was a very homogeneous community. Everybody was essentially earning the same, I think, salary, because the homes were all the same, and it was that way for miles and miles around. And I think there was probably, and as a result of that also, races. I don't think that there were any African American or Hispanic or possibly even Asian kids where I was when I grew up. I think they were all white. We were all white, middle class, upper middle class, And so
And that was the case in Reseda too?
that was the case in Reseda too, yeah. I know Reseda now has a much larger Hispanic community and possibly African American, but at the time it was all just white. And certainly at camp, the kids were all white, but they were from more diverse economic backgrounds. And so I think what I missed out on was that diversity, and I think it had a real impact on the late development I had in thinking about other ways of thinking about really anything, politics and life generally, and society. I think if I had seen more people of greater diversity, I might have had a greater interest in societies and in learning and things of that nature. I thought it was a very predictable, calm, um, nurturing environment where everything was very safe and taken care of for us, and there was, I never saw any crime, was never afraid. I always felt like we could stay out really late at night, playing in the streets, walking to and from school on our own, and I always felt safe. No, it's really, nothing comes to mind that I think was an advantage to being in the suburbs as a Jew as opposed to if I had been living in Los Angeles at the time and being Jewish. And I think the same things that I think were advantageous about living in the city would have probably been equally beneficial to me in my Judaism. That is, I would have been exposed to a greater diversity of Jews if I lived in the city than I did when I was living in the suburbs. I had no real awareness of it, no interest in it. It just didn't exist. The only thing that really mattered to me was my neighborhood, my school, and at times when we were in synagogue, the synagogue. But I really wasn't aware of or interested in anything else.
And do you think that was the same with your parents?
I don't think so. I think they were more interested and certainly more aware, and my parents had come from back east, so I know that they were aware of the world outside of suburbia.
Right.
But also, and I think they were just aware of it because they were older, but they certainly didn't instill any kind of interest about it in me. I really wasn't aware of it. All I knew was at some point I had to get a draft card, and I got a draft card something like 6 months before they ended the draft.
But that still didn't trigger any fear or interest in you?
I think at the time I may have been afraid that there was a possibility that I'd have to go to war, but I really didn't think about it. When I was that age, I was just interested in the musical bands I was playing in and my friends and hanging out with my friends, and wasn't really engaged at all. Didn't really think about things. I think everybody had very high expectations of me, and they just didn't know what to do with the fact that my expectations for myself seemed to be so much lower. I think my parents wanted me to do great things in my life, and but I think they felt like they didn't know how to motivate me, and they did not, by the way they lived their own lives and the way they talked to me, do anything to motivate me. And it really, the thing that motivated me was my peers. When I went to that summer camp, and I was day in and day out for a whole summer spending time with kids who were not like me at all and were not as impressed by me as those that I was hanging out with when I was at school, and I had to change, and I had to change for the better. what really forced me to open my eyes and change. That was the greatest influence. If it had not been a Jewish summer camp, it had been some other kind of summer camp, I don't know whether the influence would have been as strong. Because after all, much of what we did at the summer camp over the summer was Jewish and related to Judaism. I remember once asking, I learned some very important lessons about myself that summer. Once, for example, I went up to, the workers would stay in the tents with the campers and the counselors, and I went up to the counselor for my tent one day and I asked him, would you mind if I play your guitar? And he said, well, I'd rather you not, but if you have to, could you please go behind the tree and do it? And the reason he was saying that was that it was the Sabbath, when you don't play musical instruments. And so I was completely unaware of the fact that either I was unaware that it was Sabbath or I knew it was Sabbath, but it didn't dawn on me that you don't play musical instruments. And so I began to come up against people who had different views from my own, and mainly that was due to the fact that they were so much more knowledgeable than I was. And so I learned a tremendous amount. But also I started feeling badly that I didn't know those things, and it motivated me to start learning. So for the next year or so, I was on a very steep learning curve to learn a lot that I didn't know. Well, there were some people who lived on the corner that had a huge antenna, ham radio antenna or some special TV antenna, and some friends of mine and I were convinced that they were Russian spies, but I think that was just sort of the, wild imagination of 9 or 10-year-olds and nothing more than that. In fact, I don't even think they were Russian. I was in the Jewish community in Los Angeles growing up in the San Fernando Valley, and then there was the Jewish community in Berkeley, and then there was the Jewish community in Cambridge, England, when I was there living in Cambridge for 2 years, and then there's the Jewish community here in San Francisco. I think that the Jewish community in Los Angeles when I was growing up and the one here are both mainly conservative Jewish communities, and I move between the two of them interchangeably. I think they're, for the most part, literally read out of the same book. The community I was at, Cambridge, was an Orthodox community, so it was very different, more traditional.
But aside from the content of the service, did you feel like there was more contact and support in one over another, like outside of synagogue, or there was more of a sense of like home in one over the other, or anything about that?
I don't think so. I know generally it's said that the Jewish community here in San Francisco is less cohesive than, certainly than Los Angeles, so that there's more contact in Los Angeles. You're just aware of more Jewish people and more Jewish things, and there's greater Jewish identity than there is in San Francisco. That there are far more people, for example, in Los Angeles, who belong to synagogues than than Jews in San Francisco. But I've never personally experienced those differences. And I know that when I was in Cambridge, I felt Jewish all the time because I was very observant, and virtually all my friends were Jews, and I observed the Sabbath, and I prayed regularly, so prayer and Jewish identity was so much more of my day-to-day identity.